USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. An in-depth look at this week's top college hockey matchup and a preview of the other big games.
Welcome to the USCHO Game of the Week podcast for Thursday, November 4th, 2021. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. This week we feature a heavyweight bout as number 4 Minnesota Duluth travels to number 10 Western Michigan.
And joining us now in the USCHO Game of the Week podcast, the head coach of Western Michigan, that's Pat Fershweiler. Pat, welcome to the show. Obviously, first year head coach. You've had a nice little run to date, 5-1 with probably one of the most interesting 2-game series. We were just talking about it off the air, but take us through what that series was against Colgate last week and what it was like and the comeback particularly that you made on Friday night.
Yeah, it was a real interesting game. First of all, Colgate's a real good hockey team. They're very well coached and organized, and they have some skill and some speed for sure. And we knew that coming in. And, the game started off and the end of the first period, we're all shooting them 19-6 and we're down 2-0. And then they get on the power play and their power play executed a real high level in the second period. And I think they scored 3 power play goals. All of a sudden we're down 5-0. And I didn't feel like a 5-0 game, but, you look up and it is 5-0 and that's a deep hole. And, I think we scored our first goal with 2 minutes left in the second period. And then we snuck one more in before the period. And so it was, we talked in between periods. We said, there's a light at the end of that tunnel. It's barely on and it's way down there, but those 2 goals gave us, some hope. And our guys, we have a mature group here. They didn't change. They didn't get selfish. They stuck together. They stayed in our game plan, and we got one early. Now it's 5-3, and then we just kind of tilted the ice a little bit there, and we got some gritty goals that we kind of get. Colgate makes it real hard to play down low against them. We put the puck up high, put it to the net, won some battles up front, and we got a fortunate bounce on the 6th one, a little bit of a double deflection that went in, but. If you spend enough time down there, and you get enough shots headed toward the net, sometimes you get a fortunate break.
The second night, you end up again in a third period hole, find a way to tie it in the third. Then it's an overtime win. What does this do for confidence for a team? I assume you as a coach don't want to be falling behind and chasing games all season, but it still says that you have some confidence that even when you're down, that you're not out.
No, there's no doubt. I mean, our guys, like I said, we're a mature group, and they don't flinch very often. We didn't flinch against Michigan when we're down 2-0. Haven't beat them 5-2 the night before, and we came back in that game to get into overtime, and we haven't flinched all season. And our group doesn't change. We come, we do our thing. They stick together. Nobody looks left or right. They expect more from themselves every shift, and we're there to battle every shift.
Mentioned off the top, you're a first-year head coach, but you were with this program prior and under Andy Murray. How much do things change? How much do they stay the same now that you're behind the bench? Is there some sort of a mark you look to put on a program, or do you feel that what Andy Murray had done and established there was pretty solid, and you're just trying to build upon that?
No, for sure. I mean, Andy Murray's a world-class coach and a legend for sure, and he put a great foundation in here of success and work ethic and things like that. And, there's some difference between Andy and I. I'm probably more of a relationship coach with the players. But he had a great way about him, and his style was super successful. So, coming from being the associate head coach to the head coach, my relationship with the players hasn't changed. I'm always just direct, honest. I believe players love honesty, and they know if they've been good, they know if they haven't been good. And let's talk it out. And how do you get better if you haven't been good? And how do you stay the same, stay good if you have been good? And we just have real honest conversations. We like guys that want to come to the rink and enjoy the process. We like guys that love hockey, and that's easy to say, but I think everybody loves playing the games. Do they love preparing for the games? And that's where we got a good group here that does that. And they come to work every day, and we work them real hard. We coach them real hard, but they enjoy it because they know they're getting better.
You made the trip to that nice little arena that they have at Colgate, and it seems this year there are a lot more East-West matchups in the early season. Is that something we should see more of, especially Western and Midwestern teams coming east?
Oh, I love it. I love playing new opponents. And it was a great experience out there. Colgate's got a beautiful campus. Like you said, you mentioned their rink is gorgeous new rink. I didn't know that going out there. We walked in, our players were pleasantly surprised. They get a real good thing going out there. And anytime you can play new opponents and maybe perhaps see a new style of play. And, I think that just makes you better at the end of the year.
Speaking of rinks, you have one of the legendary atmospheres in college hockey at Lawson Arena. I had the pleasure of being there once several years ago, the student section, the Lawson Lunatics. Getting back in front of real fans this season, how great is that for the program? And how are the guys feeling that with energy and so forth?
It's what college sports in general, hockey for sure, is all about, right? You're playing in front of your peers, and the excitement of college sports and the emotion that's injected in college sports. It's everything that's great about college sports and at any level, at all sports. So, I think we have some of the best, as you mentioned. Our Lawson Lunatic crowd it just injects life into the building, and injects life into our players and pushes them forward in lots of games. And it makes it a real hard place to play here at Lawson.
As you get into NCHC play, you look at the league, and arguably it's the toughest league in college hockey. Maybe the Hockey East fans will argue that, but you've got really 6 teams who are legitimately battling for the top of the league, and 2 others that are up and coming and could make a dent in that too. How tough is it going to be as you get into NCHC play to be one of the teams that finishes in the top 4?
As you said, I certainly believe that we have the deepest, most competitive group in college hockey as well. And it's, we found out that our 3 kind of super seniors, if you will, Paul Washy, Josh Basalt, and Ethan Frank, were going to return for their 5th year. And we're excited. And then we look over and Duluth has 5 or 6 guys back, and St. Cloud has 5 or 6 guys back, and they were both in the Frozen Four. And then you wonder, did we gain ground or lose ground? It's just, North Dakota just simply reloads every year. And in Omaha, don't sleep on Omaha. That's a super talented team down there. They can score lots of goals. So then you look over at Miami, and they have a freshman last year who was arguably the best goalie in our conference, and maybe the best goalie in the country. He gives them a chance every night, and Chris Bergeron's certainly going to build that program. And they got a new thing going out with the new building in CC. So there's lots of energy out there. Denver every year is a great squad, and David Carl's done a nice job with them as well. So there are no nights off in our league. We know that coming in, and I believe it's only gotten tougher. This might be the most competitive year of the conference.
You mentioned the 5th year of the super seniors. You also have the one-time transfer rule that's been put in place. How has that affected how you look at recruiting and planning for scholarships and all that?
We're still learning it. It's an interesting world. It just opened up last year. And frankly, we went after, we tried for 2 transfers this year only, and we didn't get either. And both good players, good kids, and they both went to good programs. But I know some people have 5 transfers or 6 transfers. And how does that, or the guy being there 1 year or 2 years, how does it affect your culture? How does it affect your core? I think college hockey and really all of college sports are trying to figure out those things. Does a 1-year guy help you? Maybe if you have a strong enough already core built, does he come in and he's different and it takes a year to fit? Like, does he benefit? Does he not? Is it better to have a young, talented guy that's here for longer? I think those are all questions that are unanswered yet. And I think they probably are situational from one person to the next, but it's certainly interesting going forward how that's going to play out. And I think it'll be, honestly, I expect it to be different every year. Like we had a 0 this year. Do we have some next year? Maybe, we'll see at the end of the year.
Going back to the NCHC, and that's where you're going to start play in your league this weekend. Minnesota Duluth is the opponent. They will come into Lawson Arena. You've looked at it on tape, I assume. What are you seeing from Scotty's team? I think it's typically a very similar team, hard to play against, heavy team that is usually very experienced. But what do you see when you look at them on tape?
I see the exact same thing. I see honestly, if I'm going to be honest, maybe a little more talented version of ourselves. They're deep, they're mature. They're really good defensively, and they work extremely hard. I mean, Scott Sandlin's a great coach, and you don't win 3 national championships and losing a national championship game without being a real organized, good coach. And he's done an extremely good job up there. So it's a battle every time we play. There's 2 teams that look a lot like each other, that play a lot like each other. And we're looking for some good contests.
You also mentioned that they're an older team, you're an older team. What is that like when 2 teams that are not, I see Boston College a lot out here that, they consider themselves old this year, but they're still the youngest team in the country because, I mean, there are some teams where the average age is under 21. Your probably average age is pushing, over 21, maybe even pushing 22 for both of these teams. Does that change the type of game that gets played?
I think a lot of that starts with the recruiting process and, what we think we can do and how we think we can be successful. And the Boston colleges of the world, Boston universities, Michigans of the world, they're often, obviously, Michigan's got 7 first rounders on their team. Those first rounders aren't going to make it past. Are they even going to make it to 20 in college? And they're elite, talented players. Our guys are they later bloomers? Are they making it on hard work instead of pure skill? There's a different combination in there, but we recruit to our identity, and that's guys that want to work hard and want to get better every day. And so those kind of guys, I think Duluth does the same. So now we got a bunch of maybe a little older guys who want to work you to death, and those other teams may have some younger guys that can maybe get you a skill, and so it's an intriguing matchup every time we play. Like we play Michigan, and they made some plays that simply made you say, "Wow!" Owen Power is if you can't appreciate how good a hockey player that is, you're not a hockey fan. Like he is a superstar player who I expect to go right into the National Hockey League and contend for Rookie of the Year and be a 15-year NHL player. And the other guys there with Ken Johnson and it just goes down the list. And you guys get to see them out at BC and BU all the time, those kind of players. So it's exciting to play against, and it's an intriguing matchup for sure for college fans.
Well, this weekend, a little bit different. It'll be the heavyweight battle, University of Minnesota Duluth. They travel to Western Michigan, and Pat Fershweiler, it's great to have you join the podcast for the first time, and certainly good luck this weekend and good luck the rest of the way.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to meet you.
That's Western Michigan head coach Pat Fershweiler. We'll be back with more of the Game of the Week podcast in just a moment.
This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Continuing with the Game of the Week podcast, I'm Ed Trefzger with Jim Connelly. Jim, why don't we start with the matchup we were just talking about with Western Michigan head coach Pat Fershweiler. And first, let me say what a delight it was to meet Pat and get a chance to talk to him. But these, I think he really summed it up very well. These are 2 really heavy, hard-playing teams that are almost mirror images of each other. Does anybody have a bit of an advantage in this matchup?
Well, he came straight out and said maybe, Duluth is the same team as them with a little bit more skill, and skill can win. We know that. But I at the same time think that, right now the mentality inside the locker room for the Broncos has to be really strong. They're coming off of, a couple of comeback wins, one of the most dramatic fashion possible. And as he mentioned, even the loss that they took this season to Michigan, that was a game that they trailed 2-0 and forced overtime before they lost. So I just feel like the attitude right now for Western Michigan has to be real strong. There's going to be a lot of positivity, and that sometimes goes a long way. But what you're facing is a Minnesota Duluth team that is experienced, aged, very heavy, very, very heavy, and they play. I'm not talking about they're always just dropping bodies, but you're not going to touch a puck without feeling somebody on you when you play Minnesota Duluth. That's what they do very well. So I think that is one of we both have used the word throughout this podcast, heavyweight. And that's really what this feels like, is a heavyweight battle between 2 very good teams.
Well, as we get into ECAC play, 2 Ivies face off, and they didn't get to play at all last season. Number 15, Cornell, visits number 13, Harvard. Cornell had a 3-2 and a 1-0 overtime win each night against Alaska last weekend. Meanwhile, Harvard put up 16 goals in 2 games. This seems like polar opposites playing against each other. I know Mike Schaefer's always had very strong defensive teams. What can we expect out of this? Do we expect a Cornell game that's low scoring, or is Harvard going to be able to rack up some goals? I suppose that's the question we won't know the answer to until they hit the ice.
Yeah, I guess that, it's who imposes their will. I don't know that Harvard necessarily thinks that every night they're going to go out and average 8 goals a game. They'd be happy with 3 or 4, I'm sure, because they have some pretty good defense and goaltending that can, stop pucks and hold opponents off the boards. But if it becomes a track meet, advantage Harvard. This is a Cornell team that has always been based on being strong defensively. Yes, they've had some high scoring players to go through there, but when I think of the better players that go through Cornell, they're usually defensemen and goaltenders. So I think that, if this becomes a run and gun game, then I think that Cornell's at a deficit. But at the same time, this is a rivalry game and it's weird to play these games. This is their second week of the season for Ivies. And here they are playing their big rival right away, right off the bat. And this is a game that every year is packed no matter where it's played. The tickets are hard to come by. The fans are rabid. It should be a good game. It's just strange that this game is getting played, basically in the early parts of the season, as opposed to, later in February, March, when you think about the biggest games being played.
Well, talk about big games. Let's turn to Hockey East, a home and home series. On Friday, number 7 Providence is at number 12 UMass. They head to Rhode Island on Saturday. If you had asked me about this before the season started, I would have said, well, UMass probably has an advantage here, but I really like the way Providence is playing, and UMass has lost a little bit from last year's national championship team.
They have, and I think some of those, departures, they couldn't keep as many fifth-year players as I'm sure they would have liked to. So you look at players like Laganoff and Chow that have transferred out, and some of the other players that just left to play NHL hockey. So they're missing a lot of what won the national championship, but they're still a very good team. And the reality, I think, when you look at Providence and UMass, is every time they battle each other, they're so evenly matched. There's not a lot that is going to separate these two teams. And very similar to what we mentioned with Western Michigan and Minnesota Duluth, they're very similar with the way they play the game, the way they approach the game. And I think both know that they can play up-tempo hockey, but they both also try to fundamentally play good defense. And that's what it comes down to. I can remember going back, I think it's about 3 years, and I saw all 3 of the series, three of the regular season games between these two teams. And the team that played the best lost all 3 games. So when you have such a fine line that, razor thin margin that defines which team is better, that happens more than you'd expect. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a team, have a 37-17 shot advantage and lose the game, and maybe territorially control that game. I know shots can be deceiving, but sometimes you can territorially control these games, but a goaltender saves some things. You don't get the pucks bouncing the way you want to. And next thing you know, you played a near perfect game and you still lose.
Number 11, Denver, last year had a disappointing season. Coach David Carl has the Pioneers playing very well. They travel for a 2-game series to number 8, North Dakota, a team that you talk about losing players, lost a ton, and really had to bring in some transfers just to fill out the roster with so many guys going pro. North Dakota off to a little bit of a slower start, a 6-4 loss in the Hall of Fame game to Penn State last weekend. Is this an opportunity for Denver to maybe make a statement and pick up a few points in the NCHC?
I think they approach it as such, but the one thing that you got to think about North Dakota is coming off of a loss in a big game and on a big stage that they probably would have liked to have, treated their fans that made the trip to Nashville to wins. They're going to be hungry, and hungry teams are the most dangerous teams in hockey. I say it all the time, especially hungry underdogs. Now, I would never put North Dakota down as an underdog this season or any season. They're typically one of the best teams in the country. In Denver, I think that they've ridden along pretty steadily this season. They haven't had the bumps in the road that they did out of the gate last year. So it's one of those. This is a tough one to handicap because of the fact that you really don't know, which team is going to show up for each club. And, if North Dakota can shut teams down and score some goals, they are the better team. But, as we saw with Penn State, you open that game up a little bit and they get the opportunities. And there were some goals that, there's some pretty goals in there for Penn State, but there was some missed covers. And in defensively, when you're missing your coverages, as I thought North Dakota was, it can be a struggle. And that's something that Denver has the firepower to capitalize on.
We haven't paid much attention in the Game of the Week podcast yet this season to teams in Atlantic hockey. But two squads who are going to battle for the top of the league face off this weekend, a Saturday-Sunday series, as RIT, who was picked fourth in the league by the coaches before the season, goes to the team that the coaches picked for number one, American International. AIC coming off a 2-2 tie and a 2-1 overtime loss to Quinnipiac, a team they battled very well. And RIT coming in after they had non-conference wins over St. Lawrence and Notre Dame, and also have picked up 9 of 12 points in conference. I haven't seen a lot of AIC this year. Eric Lang is a terrific recruiter, brought in some transfers, kept some fifth-year seniors. Meanwhile, RIT has gotten some notice out of the play of junior netminder Colby Matthews, and then a freshman centerman, Carter Wilkie, who has been Rookie of the Week in Atlantic hockey three times already this season.
Yeah, I'm interested in this one. That's why I kind of put this one on the list. AIC has not had the start that they'd like, but they also played in terms of a non-conference schedule, a pretty difficult slate, starting with Providence, then 2 against UMass. They played some league games against Army and actually dropped one of those. And then the series you mentioned with Quinnipiac. But the whole thing is in all of those games, take one of the UMass games out maybe. And that Providence game got a little out of hand at the end too, but they've played pretty well. And I thought that they impressed me with the way that they went down to Quinnipiac and played a good game down there last week. I thought that was kind of a little bit of a litmus test for them to see, because we know that Quinnipiac has played solid basically all season. So I thought that was a big test for them. And, they didn't get the win, but, to get a tie and a 1-goal loss in a very close game, believe that was actually overtime. Both of those games end up in overtime. So I look at that as a positive, but then you have RIT that they have to be kind of feeling confident. They've had some success out of conference. They've played well within Atlantic hockey. So right now, an RIT team that's 4-2-2 overall, that's pretty solid. I mean, that is the numbers that if you're Wayne Wilson, you looked at those first 8 games on your schedule, you probably said, hey, if we are a couple of games above 500 at the end of this, we'll be happy.
And those 2 losses are to Colgate and Notre Dame. Notre Dame, certainly a top 20 team, and Colgate, we saw how well they competed, even though they lost to Western Michigan. So yeah, that should be some interesting stuff. And those are teams that, we talked with Pat Fershweiler earlier on in the podcast about East-West matchups. And those are a couple of teams who have benefited by the experience of playing some pretty high caliber non-conference opponents that'll serve them well down the stretch in league play.
I think that, crafting a non-conference schedule is one of the most difficult challenges a coach faces every year. For one thing, you're doing it well in advance, 2-3 years, maybe even you might even make some agreements 4 years in advance these days. So to even guess where a team is going to be 2, 3, 4 years down the road, that's a stretch. But, so you want to, if you're a coach, you want to give your team some challenges. You want to give your team some opportunities to play some teams that you think are going to be better than you, maybe will get you ready to face some of the toughest opponents you'll face all year within your league. And I think that if you can do that successfully, and we've talked about some teams maybe being too successful, like Minnesota State, where they basically started out their non-league slate by playing the 6 best teams they possibly could have out of their first 6 games. It's interesting. And I think that if you don't play those tough teams early, you might pull off a ton of wins, but you also might not prepare your players for what they're going to face once they get into league play, or once the real big games start being contested in February and March. So the non-league schedule always interests me. And, not everybody can't play a top 20 team right out of the gate because there's just not enough opponents out there. but you always should be attempting to, I think, as a coach. You don't want to be sitting there putting a bunch of cupcakes like college basketball teams have been known to do in college football. In college hockey, I think you should always be trying to put the best teams on your schedule, because at the end of the year, that's what's going to help you the most in the pairwise.
And the real danger when you've played a top 20 team or a top 10 team is a letdown the week after. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about that with Derek Schooley on our Weekend Review podcast. And he talked about how a team can get really up for a tough opponent and then maybe not be prepared mentally or take seriously enough a league opponent the following weekend. And that can be dangerous.
It certainly happens. And I've seen it happen more than more than most coaches want to admit. It does exist, and you get those highs. It's that dopamine high that you can kind of really, feel like you're on top of the world. And then, at that point, you're also putting a bullet on your back that the opponent that you're going to face next just feels like, hey, we need to knock these guys off. And when you put all that together, it's a dangerous formula.
A lot of great hockey this weekend. I hope you can catch some in person or at least on video. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll see you next time.
This has been the USCHO Game of the Week podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.